Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this MaritzCX webcast. I'm Tom Evans, and thank you for your patience as we were waiting to get started there. We literally have several hundred joining today, so we wanted to give everyone as much opportunity as possible to join us from the top. So thank you for understanding that. So let's get started with today's presentation, the ROI of feelings, understanding the emotional connection to your brand. Our presenters today are Stacy Bolger and Lisa London, and I'll introduce both of them more formally in just a minute. But before I do, just a couple of items. First, this webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a copy of the presentation and the recording in a follow-up email. The email should hit your inbox probably within 24 hours. If you miss it, just reach out to one of us on the show today, and we'll be happy to send it your way. Secondly, we will have a Q&A session once Stacy and Lisa wrap up their portion of the presentation. So please feel free to submit your questions anytime during the presentation, but just know we'll be saving those questions for the designated Q&A time. And then, of course, if you do have a question, just type that into the question box on your screen and hit submit, and then we'll do our best to get to all of those submissions before the program ends at the top of the hour. So let's meet today's presenters. We'll start with Lisa London. Lisa is the Director of Strategic Consulting at MaritzCX, and in this role, she leads consulting solutions like CX evolution and works across MaritzCX sectors to develop thought leadership within the organization. Prior to joining MaritzCX, Lisa worked on both the client and supplier sides, from startups like Roku and YouGov to global companies like Anheuser-Busch and the Nielsen Company. Lisa is a trained social scientist, and she earned a PhD from the University of Pittsburgh with a focus on social psychology and mass behavior. So glad to have Lisa with us today. And then kicking us off will be Stacy Bolger. Stacy is Senior Director of Strategic Consulting for MaritzCX, and in this role, she helps organizations develop and apply the capabilities necessary to understand customer needs and apply their customer insights to drive tangible business results. Stacy has over 15 years of client-side experience leading customer-focused efforts in the financial services and retail industries. And this includes a decade in leadership roles at American Family Insurance, where she led large-scale customer satisfaction programs and change initiatives. Stacy has a business degree from Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and serves on the board of directors of the Western Wisconsin Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. So with those introductions, I'm going to turn this over to Stacy to get us started.
Excellent. Thanks, Tom. I appreciate it. Thank you all for joining us today to talk about the ROI of feelings. And before we get started, I want to share a little bit about myself. I'm actually based here in Wisconsin, where last week the temperatures on record here were colder than the temperatures in both Antarctica and on Mars. And yes, I did say Mars. So while it's warmed up here a bit, I'm actually currently looking out my window at freezing rain. I've still got my hands wrapped around my morning coffee, not just in an effort to get warm, but because I have to admit I'm a total coffee junkie. It's one of those things where after my first sip, I kind of go, and all becomes right with my world, at least for the moment, unless, and this is a big unless, right? The unless is if I'm on the go and I have to stop by a Starbucks. Now, don't get me wrong. I love my Starbucks. This is not a bad story. What I don't love is getting my order right with a huge line of cars behind me. And I'm willing to bet that some of you out there are likely not along with me. In fact, I think this is a pretty safe bet because, as it turns out, I'm not the only one that feels this way. I was swiping through my Twitter feed and came across this exchange. It's real, this inexplicable anxiety generated by having to place your daily coffee order. But these folks in this exchange here feel like they've won simply because they figured out how to use Starbucks mobile ordering. Not that difficult, but these folks have mastered the mobile order, and it brings them true glee and a sense of relieved anxiety. So it gets me thinking I should probably actually start using that mobile app a little bit more frequently. Now, other than a thoroughly entertaining Twitter exchange, why do these emotions even matter? Let me raise this thought. If I can alleviate my order anxiety simply by using a mobile app, do you think I'd be more likely or less likely to purchase more Starbucks coffee, right? Not a difficult question, I don't think, in the minds of most of you. I am much more likely to purchase more if I'm able to minimize the negative emotions and feel more positively about my experience on the whole, especially considering that Starbucks brand identity is grounded in offering customers a relaxing and enjoyable experience. It's a pretty big promise there, and to succeed on that promise, Starbucks had to be rigorous and agile in its approach to understanding its customers. In fact, they've even gone so far as to incorporate neuroscience, really literally measuring the brain activity in response to stimuli, to understand what motivates consumer behaviors. What their research has shown is that indeed, high mobile loyalty or mobile ordering is important to their growth strategy. And just look at these data points. This is paying off for Starbucks. And it's all because they went to the degree of understanding what role emotions played in their customers' decisions. Now, you might be saying to yourself out there that I'm attributing quite a lot of this success to emotions. And to be honest, in your shoes, I would probably be doing the same. So I'll grant you that. That said, I'm going to turn this over to Lisa now to show us that we're absolutely right to be talking more about feelings in our business decisions these days. Lisa?
Yeah, there's definitely something more here, Stacy. Emotions matter, and they matter across the board, regardless of industry. Across sectors, 80% of companies that proactively gather insights and seek to analyze their customers' feelings report improved financial results year over year. But you don't have to just take our word for it. That was our data. Here's what our colleagues are saying. They echo our own findings. A study published in the Harvard Business Review showed that the financial value of emotionally connected customers, not just satisfied customers, is in the double digits. So the relationship is there, that customers who are emotionally connected end up bringing much higher value to the company. Now, you might be looking at this slide and thinking, well, that's Starbucks, or that's the coffee business or the retail industry, but I'm in the financial services sector. Well, we know that emotional connection matters across the board, but its impact does vary by industry, as you can see on the right-hand side of this slide. But in no case does it not matter. So let's tie this together. Remember, our own CX evolution data, that 80% that I showed you on the previous slide, it shows that in general, companies that pay attention to their customers' feelings have better financial performance. Our data shows that retail companies are more likely to have better ROI when they do the right things for their customers' feelings. And this relationship is just as strong in other sectors like financial services. It's even of clear importance in industries like utilities and B2B technology. So that was some pretty compelling data, and it doesn't even factor in what we know about how caring about customers' feelings impacts the employee experience and the downstream benefits of that on ROI. You can see here that among companies that use insights into customers' feelings, 73% have employees who are completely satisfied with their jobs, and 77% have employees who say they would recommend their company as a desirable place to work. And that too translates to real ROI. Nearly 90% of companies with completely satisfied employees or with employees who strongly recommend their companies have improved financial performance year over year. So, caring about your customers' feelings matters from two different angles: directly from your customers and indirectly from your employees. And to understand why I keep hammering home the importance of emotions, it might be helpful to talk about our current knowledge of how the brain has evolved. Okay, since we don't really have time to go through all the literature, I'm going to leverage my background in social psychology to summarize what we do know about decision making based on how the brain processes information. First, our brains only have so much capacity. Brain space is a finite physical thing. Therefore, we have to conserve brain power because we have so much stuff coming at us all the time, every day, and we can't process it all. We have to develop shortcuts. Our brains are efficient. They store our experiences and leverage those for similar decisions we have to make in the future. We encode our experiences, specifically the emotional feeling that remains from past experiences, as heuristics, or mental cues or shortcuts that allow us to circumvent thinking long and hard about every little thing, and instead make quick, efficient decisions based on feelings that we already have. This is what we might call gut feelings. So there's a big but here, however. However, your brain does not first go to those cues or those gut feelings when the thing that you're experiencing is unusual or novel. Our brains invest more energy and processing power into experiences that are not routine. And taking that a step further, the implication here is that for situations that are new, your brain goes into gear and brings in some processing power that we call rational analysis. Your brain saves the full evaluation cost-benefit analysis for new decisions, not for the ones where it feels it has prior experience to leverage. These two different types of processing, gut feeling versus rational analysis, even happen in two different areas of the brain. What this means is that a huge number of your daily decisions, including your personal decisions and your professional decisions, are made intuitively. And the part of your brain which drives intuitive decision-making relies more upon feelings and emotions than it does rationality. And what does that mean? Ultimately, it means that your customers are also subject to this intuitive emotional decision-making. So let me ask you, do you know how your customers feel about their experiences with your brand? Stacy, you want to take that one on?
Absolutely. Logically, see what I did there? Logically, most of you will agree that understanding your customers' experiences with your brand is critically important. However, few organizations give appropriate weight to the feelings generated or really the emotional side of these experiences. Let me talk about a very real example. I come, as noted in my introduction, from the financial services industry. And I have to say, I actually worked for an organization that was fantastic and led the industry in their focus on the customer. But storytelling being what it is, bad stories make good presentations, right? So I would have numerous good stories to share about how feelings and emotions were incorporated into practices and experiences that our customers had while I was there. But today I'm going to focus on one that is very emotionally driven. By nature, consumers who seek out insurance products are, for the most part, operating using their logic. They know that to protect their financial well-being, insurance is an important purchase. The thing to note is that when these same consumers consume insurance products, they are nearly 100% in an emotional state. Their home has been ravaged by a fire, their child got into a car accident, they've had their business destroyed, a spouse or a parent has passed away, right? Logically, we know that these situations must be handled very delicately. Realistically, here's an example that I heard firsthand while listening in on a call in the call center that I used to oversee. A customer called in and requested to change the name on his account. The rep stated, sure, we can do that, and asked what name they'd like it changed to. The customer stated, "Please remove my wife's name from the account and just use mine. She passed away last week." The rep, without pausing, replied, "Sure, we can do that. Can I confirm the spelling of your name?" Little bit of a sock in the gut there. Now, I knew this rep to be a very kind and compassionate person, and actually was a top performer within our environment. Yet in the moment, he was focused on process, what he needed to do to complete the task, and his mind was in go mode, right? So just consider for a moment how differently the experience would have been if he had instead had been trained, and automatically he would have proactively considered the emotional side of that customer experience and done training specifically on listening and responding instead of just on process. And I think it's important to note here that, in fact, that's exactly where, as time went on, the training of this program went. But at that moment, the reality of the situation was, as much training as had been done, it wasn't automatic for that rep to instantly understand the emotion attached to that situation and respond appropriately. So Lisa, I'm going to turn it back to you for a moment to talk about what we can learn from this situation.
Yes, and for that, let's turn back to behavioral science. There are 3 behavioral science principles that I'd like to share with you to help illustrate what we've already been talking about today. The first is decision fatigue. So here's an example. There are some decisions for my family that someone, usually me, has to make every single day. It is such an annoying and never-ending choice, and I hate that I am forced to have to think about it after the end of an already tiring day. It's that daily question, what are we going to have for dinner? So on a good day, I'll think, yeah, I should have defrosted some meat and roast the broccoli that's going bad in my fridge. But in reality, on most nights, what do you think I do? Yeah, I called for takeout, and I asked my husband to pick it up on the way home. This is an example of decision fatigue, which is that the quality of our decisions made by a person, like me, deteriorates after a whole bunch of decision-making, like a typical workday. You know, like the decision-making that we all need to make every day. Decision fatigue causes irrational trade-offs in decision-making. Now, the second principle that I want to talk about is the peak end rule. The peak end rule states that regardless of whether an experience is pleasant or unpleasant, people judge an experience largely based on how they felt at its peak, that is, at its most intense point, and at its end, rather than the average of every moment of that experience or the total sum of the experience. So thinking back to Stacy's insurance example, what do you think was the most intense moment? I would say probably the point when the spouse had to force himself to say to someone he didn't know, my wife passed away. Now, the insurance policy ultimately may have been switched over to his name, which is what he really wanted to have happen. But in this case, I'm willing to bet that his peak moment, the one that he remembers, the one driving his evaluation of that experience, was his memory of not receiving human sympathy when he mentioned his loss. Lastly, I want to talk about the pain of paying. I know that I myself generally find that I use credit cards more than I use cash, and I'm not alone. One of the drives that makes us uniquely human is the drive to acquire, myself included, and we don't like to give things up that we've gained, money included. We are loss averse. We don't like handing over our hard-earned dollars in cash transactions. So smart companies like Starbucks, remember the example that Stacy gave in the beginning, have figured out that they need to remove that feeling of losing in the payment process, which makes it easier for people like me to avoid thinking about the fact that you're paying when you're using their app. So we've shared some data, and we've shared some stories, and we've shared some behavioral science principles that can be applied to enhance the feelings you're leaving your customers with after they have an interaction with your brand. But in driving ROI, I noted a second avenue, which was via the employee experience. So Stacy, could you tell us a little bit more about what we mean here?
Absolutely. So let's go back to our care center rep story, because in fact, the story didn't end when the employee hung up on the call with the insured who'd lost his wife. Later that day, he had a one-on-one coaching meeting with his manager in which this call was the topic of conversation. This contact center had a wonderfully solid coaching culture that was so evident in the way that the team manager acted and in the way this individual handled the situation. After listening to the call together, the manager asked the rep to self-evaluate his performance. And now, outside the immediacy of the situation, of the call, the rep immediately recognized that he hadn't acknowledged the very sensitive customer situation, as the manager anticipated he would. So the manager then worked with him to identify ways he could slow down, ways he could engage, and how to better actively listen on these calls moving forward. So as a result of this, the employee left the meeting feeling really empowered to better handle the challenging calls that would inevitably come the remainder of his shift. And I'm speaking of this in general terms for protection of the of the participants, but because I had actually heard this call myself, I wanted to follow up on this situation and understand the way it was handled. So I'm describing to you a very real application of this situation here. But what I'm going to do is take us into a hypothetical setting for a moment, and let's look at this from the alternate perspective. So what if instead of handling it as in the way that the manager so appropriately did, that manager had berated the employee for the way the call was handled? The rep likely would have left that office feeling pretty down, pretty hard on himself, because remember, this is in general a top performer, somebody who is generally known to be kind and very compassionate. And I'd have to assume that this employee would probably not be at his peak performance for the remaining 40 to 60 customer calls he would take the rest of his shift. So how many of those customers in that situation do you think would go away feeling valued, taken care of, listened to? Probably not too many of them. And while this one touch point with the company may not cause a customer to leave, how many of these same interactions would it take? The simple impact of that call on the emotional connection the customer had with the brand and the impact that this had on future decisions the customer would make about doing business with the company could be pretty strong. And it doesn't end there, because Lisa mentioned the employee piece, and that's what I want to speak to next. We all have worked with teammates, may have employees, and so when I ask this question, it's probably going to resonate. But how long do you think that an employee who had just experienced that negative response to a situation he mishandled, how long do you think that employee would stick around in that environment? Probably not real long, which means that the organization would then need to rehire to fill the role, likely with a less experienced rep. And that hiring process takes time, which would then impact the center's capacity and things like overtime expense, customer call wait time, hiring expense, recruiting expense. So the good news in this situation is that wasn't the way the situation was handled. But we all know of organizations that this probably is very likely the case. And so just like we did with customer feelings, it's important to understand the way that employee feelings are being managed. And so Lisa, let's talk. I'm gonna go into this myself here, but certainly chime in if you want to. Let's talk briefly about integrating what we know from behavioral science with how to enhance employee feelings of well-being at work. I'm going to talk about 3 behavioral science principles. First is the principle of purpose, which states that employees who interact with beneficiaries of their work, and thus are given a sense of purpose, are not just happier than those who don't, they are vastly more productive. So thinking back on our contact center example, the employee leaving the meeting with his manager, who was a great coach, had likely had a newfound purpose in working to enhance the experience of each customer by applying those newly found skills. The second principle, multitasking or task switching. I chuckle here because I'd love to know how many of you are multitasking right now while you're listening to this webinar, right? It's the reality. We all do it. It's the cardinal sin of multitasking, which science tells us, and there's been a lot in science lately coming out that tells us it takes a heavy toll on the multitasker. It costs us time and energy, leading to that feeling of being drained, of being wiped out and completely spent. And it also increases the likelihood of errors. The American Psychological Association actually found that when people try to perform more than one task at a time, they actually do worse on both tasks because, and again, without going into all the science behind it, the human brain simply was not designed for multitasking. And even further, recent statistics that have come out show that it takes an average of 25 minutes to resume a task after being interrupted. And I don't know about you, but I don't have 25 minutes over and over to waste in my day. So when you think about multitasking in that way, that's a lot of productivity drain that ultimately needs to be made up one way or another, whether it's adding additional capacity, whether it's working extended hours, both of which involve inherent cost and can also lead to burnout and decreasing employee retention. Finally, let's talk about competition versus cooperation. Now, this is an age-old debate in corporate America, right? Does competition help or hurt performance and results? And I don't intend to get into that debate. What I will share is a handful of insights. What we now know is that cooperation is actually more effective than competition. It drives better achievement, it leads to greater effort, and it enables better problem solving and actually fosters more positive peer relationships. That's not to say that competition and the feelings that it creates in employees doesn't have space in corporate America. And I'm sure for every example I give you about cooperation being better than competition, you could come back at me with a great example of where competition is absolutely the right tactic. But it's helpful to understand where competition and cooperation can benefit your organization, right? So one example I'll give you related to where cooperation is actually beneficial, competition is actually beneficial, is in how it's approached. In intra-group competition, where groups working together, incorporating cooperation, is actually more effective than interpersonal competition, one-on-one competition. So that's just an example. So before we move to the Q&A portion of this session, there's a few things that I want to leave you with. First, pay attention to the emotional side of your customer and employee experiences. You now know a little bit more about how our brains process things. Thank you, Lisa. And understanding how your customers' and employees' brains process their interactions with your company are going to enable you to design and deliver on the experiences that hit all the right feels. And cue some of the songs that we had some trivia about coming to mind right now in your brain. Apologies for any earworms that we create this morning. And we know that creating the right feelings actually matters greatly to your financial success based on all the data we showed earlier in this session. Second, this concept of understanding and incorporating customer and employee feelings is not just academic, it's not ambiguous, and in fact, it's very tangible and actionable, as demonstrated by the handful of principles that Lisa and I showed on both the customer side and the employee side, demonstrating very tactically how those can be applied in a business setting. Third and finally, we are all human beings. Even when we're doing business, even when we have our business persona hats on, and we can't not bring our personal experiences and biases into our decisions. It's simply the way that our brains are wired and the way the brain works. Let's use this then to our advantage. And with that, I want to thank you all very much for your time and attention. And we I believe, have had some questions that have come in. So I'm going to turn it back to Tom to moderate that exchange.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Stacy and Lisa. Great insight. And presented and delivered very well, so thank you. And we do have several questions that have come in. Lisa, I'm going to throw this one to you. This question says they loved all the behavioral science principles that you had talked about. Feel like there's good things in there that they can apply to their CX program at their company. How can they learn more about behavioral science and the different impacts it can have on CX?
I really like I really like that question. Partly because I can do a shameless plug for our behavioral science and innovation unit at Maritz. We actually have a chief behavioral officer that works with academics across major, leading business schools to advance research in behavioral science, and also to work with individual clients on implementing and integrating some behavioral science principles into their CX programs. So if that is of interest to you, then you should reach out to us. Doesn't have to be necessarily Stacy or me, but if you're an existing client, reach out to your client success lead, or if you're a prospect, just reach out to us and we can get you in touch. But yeah, this is all stuff that we can use to embed in your CX program to make those nudges that help get your customers past just plain old satisfaction and into the realm of real emotional connection.
Great, thank you. And Stacy, what is the best way to measure customers' emotions when interacting with their brand?
Wow. Well, Tom, I think we are going to actually, Lisa and I are going to tag team on this one. It's multidimensional. I'll kick us off. I think and I'm going to come at it from a foundational understanding of, before you can measure, you have to understand what you need to measure and where you need to measure. The way I always recommend looking at this is to understand what type of persona we are talking about. And persona can mean a lot of different things, especially in the B2B space, where you're, depending on what somebody is trying to accomplish, they may interact with several different personas in order to do that. But I think the key first is to understand what experience that individual is actually going through. A common way we work to do that is via customer journey mapping, at some degree of customer journey mapping. And once we can understand what that journey looks like and what they are actually feeling, we can then identify the right places along that journey to keep tabs on what somebody is feeling, what they are thinking, as compared to what we're targeting that they feel or think in those moments. Lisa, do you mind if I hand it over to you for any insight on the actual tactical process of measuring?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so journey mapping definitely is one that I would have mentioned too, because that is so important, not only for collecting kind of in their own words, in their own language, right from the source, what your customers are going through, but it helps you identify where those real pain points are. But another way to get at this that is pretty, I would say, kind of like low-hanging fruit, is using your unstructured data. So that could be data that comes in just from your social media feed, could be open-ended responses in a survey, but any kind of unstructured data, open-ended data, can be analyzed by a person or via algorithm using text analytics, analyzing for topic and sentiment to help you understand the range of feelings that are being experienced, as well as those experiences or those feelings that are really intense. And in addition to that, once you have a sense of what the main feelings are and where they occur in your process from your journey mapping or from your unstructured data, you can collect that more, rigorously or in an ongoing way through quantitative surveys. So one way to do that, one commonly accepted way that we look at emotions in general is looking at the gap between expectations of what an experience is going to be like and the actual experience. And when you have measured what the customer's expectations are and also what their actual experience turned out to be, you can look at that gap. You can look at how big that gap is. That gives you some hints as to the impact of that experience and how that might ultimately affect your customer's loyalty. And when you have that kind of data in a survey, that means you can do all sorts of fancy analyses to find out which of those are real drivers of your customer's experience, and kind of conversely, which of those emotions actually do damage that you need to address first. So there's lots of ways. There's lots of ways to look at this, depending on what you're looking to get at and how frequently and ongoingly you want to collect that data.
Okay. Big answer. Stacy, you referenced some data related to the relationship between organizations that pay attention to feelings and financial return improvements. They wanted to know where that data originated.
Yeah, absolutely. And we referenced a bunch of different things, first related to customer experience, and then we did some linkage to employee experience. The majority of that data, now we have other sources that, of course, we noted in footnotes along the slides, but the majority of the data that we used came from a very large practitioner study. In fact, what we believe to be the largest CX practitioner study in the world, CX Evolution. And that study was one we fielded initially in 2015, refielded in 2018, and it involved over 10,000 CX practitioners from across the globe. So it was a global study. The other part of the insight that we used actually came out of our team working on our Agile employee experience suite of solutions. So they have done a lot of work in this space related to how to nimbly and in an agile way measure and monitor what is going on in the heads and minds of employees. And so we married these two bodies of data, two bodies of work to generate these figures.
Okay, do you find much difference in B2B and B2C when we talk about feelings and emotions and ROI?
Yeah, I love that question. And Lisa, you may have thoughts you want to offer too, but I saw that one come in, and I'm glad you asked it. So at its most pure form, it's just as I said at the end of our presentation, right? We are all human beings. We all have motivators. We all have sets of expectations. We all have experiences, which are the initial lens through which we experience the world. And Lisa and I may have a very similar consumer experience at work, working with another organization that we partner with. And we are both going to feel differently about it, think differently about it, and react differently to it. So I think that's again, at the foundation, we have to remember that we are human beings. We may be business people, and it may cause us to bring in different elements to the way that we view the world, but we can't change the way that our brains have been wired based on our prior experiences. The one thing I will note is that in our experience in working with clients, it generally is easier for organizations to look in a B2C space and try to understand. I shouldn't say easier because it's so multidimensional, but it's a little bit more simplistic because in a B2C space, we're talking about a consumer. In a B2B space, we're talking about a multitude of consumers, many who have different emotions, different expectations, different lenses. And so the complexity of trying to understand it and piece together what we've learned from our measurements so that we can drive the right feelings, the right reactions in each of these different personas along their journey with our organization, it's more complex. As is evidenced even in the way that I'm describing it. So I hope that made sense. Lisa, anything you would add here?
I don't think so. I think the important thing is expressing that there is some complexity there, and consequently, you have to be thoughtful and purposeful when designing the right approach there.
Yeah, and I think, I would like to give an example because I think this illustrates just how fundamentally business people still remain human beings. We were working with a B2B organization and happened to be discussing at the time a procurement individual as one of the key personas in the journey that we were mapping. And I personally had done an interview with one individual who, when we were talking about expectations and emotions, this individual said, you know what, yes, I have a job to do for my company, but at the end of the day, my reputation and what people think of me is based upon my recommendation in this role. And that is something that I am not willing to sacrifice. So I am very personally invested and motivated to ensure that when I'm working to identify the right partners, I've gotten things taken care of. And to me, it was very telling that while procurement, which is a role we often think of as being process oriented, fill out these checklists, rules oriented, right? You can only talk with certain individuals at certain times, and they're going to dictate the terms, and they're going to be negotiators. They don't feel, they negotiate. This individual, in fact, had a very strong emotion attached to the accountability he had for his organization.
Okay, great. And we're going to just do a couple more questions and end it a little bit early today. But I got a question about how do you train an employee base to balance process with empathy? And so I assume that kind of harkens back to the call center case study that you had mentioned, Stacy. So.
Yeah. I'll give a couple thoughts on that. First and foremost, I think it begins with how we're hiring employees. I think it begins with the hiring practices. Yes, we can train on empathy, but I don't think anybody on this call would likely disagree that there are certain individuals who have an aptitude for more empathy than others, just based on the nature of their personalities. And so the first thing we need to do is make sure that we're hiring the right people with the right characteristics. Once we get them in the door, again, it becomes about purpose, training for the purpose of the role versus the task of the role. Task training is important. You can't do a job if that involves working through processes via different systems on a computer if you don't know how to process those tasks. But if you understand the greater purpose in your role and what you're trying to do when you're accomplishing that task, it causes us to think a little bit more broadly about what we're doing and why we're doing it. And a really good example that is, I'm sure, very well known is at Disney, right? Having experienced some of their institute training, that organization is very purpose focused, not task oriented in terms of the way that they train their individuals. And so it's not about picking up garbage for somebody who's picking up a piece of garbage along Main Street. It's about making it a safe environment so that families can truly enjoy the time that they spend on the Disney grounds.
And Lisa, we're going to give you this last question, and then we'll wrap it up for the day. But this person wanted to know at a basic level, how can they start capturing emotions in the data that they collect?
Yes. So the easiest way, I would say, to do this is just to ask an open-ended question. Typically, those companies that ask, for example, the Net Promoter Score question, the how likely would you be to recommend this company to friends or family, is followed up by an open-ended question. You could use that open-ended question and just code it, either with a person, by a person, or using algorithms to identify what emotions kind of spontaneously pop up when you ask people to tell you what they're thinking. Or just having an open-ended question at the end of a survey, at the end of your VOC survey, asking about the overall experience or about an individual transaction, whatever it is that you happen to be focused on in that survey. But once you have a sense based on that initial kind of investigative work about what emotions matter, and again, I want to restate that customer journey mapping is really the gold standard here. I said the low-hanging fruit is using open-ended data from a survey, or I think I mentioned also earlier you could use data from social media, but what people are telling you unprompted. But journey mapping is really the gold standard because you hear directly in the voice of your customer for each step in the process that they go through with you and their relationship with you, what it is that they're feeling and how intensely they're feeling it and what prompts it. That helps you understand what to ask about in a survey. So once you have a sense of what those pain points are and what those emotions are, you can really ask in a closed-ended way in a survey about those experiences. And if you want to get really fancy, measuring, as I mentioned before, that gap between the expectations that a customer has about interacting with you and then the reality, what actually happened, and what the gap is between the two of those can be really illuminating. So yeah, the key is to first kind of do your background research using the easily available stuff, and then quantify that depending on what you learn from your initial investigations. Because no two experiences or no two companies are alike. The experience that a person goes through with your company, or even one particular process that has to do with your company, is going to vary from company to company and from process to process. So the key is to do some thoughtful kind of pre-investigative work. And while I'm talking, I wanted to also mention someone had asked about the name of the Harvard Business Review article. And the article is called The New Science of Customer Emotions, and it's from 2015. So again, The New Science of Customer Emotions, if anyone wants to look it up. And of course, if you, that's one data point. We have tons of our own data that we can dive deeply into, so reach out to us if you have any questions about that.
Great, thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Stacy. Great job today, great presentation. And thanks for everyone for joining us on this webcast. We hope you'll join us again. Our next webcast will be February the 20th, which will be the Ask the Expert webcast. So look for the invite and register for that one. So with that, and thank you to Dana Johansson, our producer on this show. Thank you all very much for joining, and have a great remainder of your day.